This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Dave McDonald.
I'm Sam Merciers.
And Sam is frozen this week, so bear with him. He's having some bandwidth troubles. But we are joined this week by half of the Brooklyn-based new music ensemble, Percussion. We have Josh Quillen and Eric Beach. Thank you guys so much for being with us this morning.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for having
us. So if you're not familiar with Percussion, I'm surprised that you found our podcast, first of all. But one of the things that I think is so remarkable about you guys is that the music is so consistently excellent and so diverse as well. And it reminds me a lot of when I was in school and first getting into new music. I didn't know Percussion. I learned Percussion a little bit later, and maybe you guys didn't exist at the time. But the ensemble that the professors and the other students always pointed us to was the Chronos Quartet. And I feel like in a lot of ways is joining that kind of rank of chamber ensemble in that it is regularly the very high level performance, and you guys are doing amazing work not surfacing composers and being a really active part of creating new repertoire. So I'm really pleased to have you guys on the show this morning. You guys have a new album out, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but one thing that we kind of touched on a while ago without talking to you guys was this Cage project you had last year, and it seems like some of the things from that Cage project influenced this new album, Neither Anvil Nor Pulley. Am I right?
Yeah, definitely.
Who wants to take that? I didn't direct it to anyone like a bad interviewer that I am.
No, that's okay. We, Eric has all of the merch sort of items at his place.
Okay.
And the Cage project came. We were having a meeting with our record label, Cantaloupe Records, and we were at a coffee shop and we were talking about unique ways to release an album, and there have been so many great recordings of Cage's works by the Amadinda Percussion Quartet, by Nexus, and we and Cincinnati Percussion Group and Third Coast Percussion in Chicago. We sort of felt like there had been so many good documentations of recorded music of Cage's that we wanted to go the other route and sort of bootleg record and give people the sort of warts and all version of what we feel Cage's music really embodies, which is the live performance of it. And we also have been heavily influenced by 433, and there's a lot of recordings of that. And we felt like, well, a good way to sort of tip our hat to Cage without recording 433 or anything like that was just to release a blank LP that had tracks on it that when you put the needle on it runs like a record, but there's nothing on the track. There's nothing pre-recorded. It's just silence. And then give people a download card with that LP that gave them access to a database of all of our live recordings of the shows. So you get 20 some odd versions or whatever of Third Construction or Child of Tree, all of which sound sort of similar, but we use different instruments sometimes, or some nights go better than others. So you sort of get a view of what it's like to be us on a daily basis playing Cage's music. And then Jason, on the LP cover, he's been influenced a lot by Robert Rauschenberg, his collage art, and Rauschenberg ran around with Cage, and so we felt like it'd be nice to have Jason design individual artwork for every LP that is sort of based on the same theme. And so Jason used gaff tape and some newspaper articles and things like that, and designed album art for each individual LP that people got. So we felt like the artifact was important to give people something, but also that it was more music than could be contained on an LP. So we give people access to a database, which I think is still, and Eric can correct me if I'm wrong, is still active to this date. And we, from time to time, put stuff up on it to sort of keep it fresh.
That's great. It seems to me to be a really honest representation of Cage. When you were describing your experience of making this recording and saying it was this warts and all thing, and you've got all these quirks with the live performance and the differences from night to night. That really struck me as being an honest representation of all of the Cage performances that I've heard in my life.
I mean, we tend to, when we commission new pieces like Dan Truman's piece or Steve Mackey or Steve Reich or whatever, when we go into the recording process, we tend to document it in a way that is probably slightly different than you're able to do all the things in a studio that you can't do live. So we track a million different things, and we get really obsessed about how things are mixed and edited and whatnot. With Cage's music, we didn't get a chance to work with him. I mean, we're one of the generations, and maybe that's why we don't feel necessarily good about sitting down and putting out a whole record of studio recorded stuff. I mean, Nexus and Amadinda and Cincinnati Percussion Group, all those guys got to work with him. So we felt like the best way to sort of tip our hat to Cage was to give you the warts and all. And in reality, the four of us are sort of four goofballs, and we're kind of warts and all anyway in person. So we felt like with this project in particular, it felt good to, put it out in a way that was honest and open.
It's a really, I think, a really great tribute. And you mentioned the Mackey recording that you guys made. That was one of my favorite recordings that I've heard of you guys. It's a great piece and performed very well.
Thanks.
So one thing that you keep talking about is the medium of these record releases, and your new project has some really unusual media as well, and I think that's a really interesting change. A lot of the conversation around the music industry, not just in the kind of music that you make and the kind of music that Sam and I make, but in the music industry writ large, including all kinds of popular music, is the devaluing of the media, the content itself, because we're experiencing it in such kind of ephemeral formats. And you guys maybe you can talk about the ideas that you guys have around these more tangible, more special, for lack of a better word, objects associated with those releases.
Yeah. So I think, everybody's asking themselves these questions these days of what does it mean to buy a CD anymore, if you can get everything on SoundCloud and iTunes and all of that. So we've been looking for ways to still have, actually, I'm not sure we know the answer to that question. We're just trying out some things to see what other options might be. And this particular release with Dan Truman made a lot of sense to, kind of have some different physical objects related to the way the piece itself gets performed. So I don't know if the camera is working okay here. I can't quite see myself. But basically, there were a couple of main things that we did, and I feel bad showing this because Josh actually put in a lot of work on this stuff. But the first thing here, if you watch the video of the piece, the large sort of second part of the piece, there's a big bass drum that is generating a feedback loop the entire time. And that feedback loop is happening with speaker drivers that are attached to the head of the bass drum. So this is sort of the magnetic speaker driver that would go behind a cone in a normal speaker. Dan takes these and attaches under the bass drum head and then creates this filtered feedback loop through the computers that of course, a bot chorale happens through those. But we thought...
Like you do.
Yeah, right, exactly. when you're a genius or whatever. We thought it would be interesting to let people sort of get that and mess around with what it's like to put the speaker driver on different surfaces. So I just grabbed, like a tin can here. So I don't know how easy it is to hear, but it actually gets surprisingly loud. This is, you know, I don't know if I put it on my computer. Can you hear it through my
Yeah. That's really interesting because the microphone's a part of the computer. That's like several levels of.
That's really strange.
We've got.
Stop it, or you're going to cause time travel.
Speaker driver inception.
It's meta merch.
Yeah, so that's just, you know, coming straight out of my iPhone right now. And this is the exact brand of speaker driver we use for the piece. It's actually gaff taped together here by Josh Quillen himself. So I mean, this is as homemade as merch can get. So yeah, that's kind of the first awesome thing.
I love the bespoke merch.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's exactly what it is. The second thing is this tether controller, which in the first half of the piece, we have the video of the whole thing online. 120 BPM is the first big movement, and at the end of that movement, there's these tethers that get used. So this tether controller, I actually have the video game that it's from. It's Real World Golf. By Game Track. And Dan actually figured out how to hack into this thing and make it talk with Max MSP. So, you know, in the video game, you would pull out both of these tethers, and actually I have the golf club right here too. You hold the golf club, and you swing it like this, and you know, it shows you your swing on the screen.
If any of you are listening to this and not watching the video, you're really missing out this week.
Yeah, so, you know, it's just tracking the sort of different XYZ and axis. And so we have sound files loaded into our computers during the piece, and you're just kind of scrolling over the file, and different effects are happening depending on which direction the tether's moving. So Dan actually created his own Max MSP patch for the merchandise release. So when you order this, you actually get your own patch. You can drop your own sound files into it, and you can perform with it live.
And so how does this work? I'm showing on the video an image of the I guess the interface for the software that comes with this, the Sound Marionette.
Yeah, exactly.
And it looks like there are two samples. One's assigned to the right and one's assigned to the left.
Yeah, and you can see those little red bars to the far left of the screen.
Yeah.
When the tether controller is active, those bars actually start shaking because there's these tiny microscopic movements happening. And as you pull the tether out, the bar scrolls across the sample.
Okay.
Basically, it can sort of freeze frame any particular moment in the sound sample. So, you know, if there's like a glissando happening, you can sort of pull out to the moment of a particular pitch and hold it there. You would hold that pitch. And then
that's
really
neat.
Interesting stuff is like the attack of a piano note. There's actually a lot of white noise that's happening right as the hammer hits the string. So if you pause in that attack moment, you get all the white noise, all of that attack sound paused. So it's a little hard to describe.
No, I think I understand.
So in the piece, the samples are of Dan playing fiddle and Dan playing piano notes. But most of the time you're hearing them backwards.
That's very cool. So it's basically scrubbing through those files, but then when you stop, it somehow sustains whatever is going on there. That's really interesting. So this is available. This is part of the release of the album. Is you can buy the version of the album that has the golf controller for you to marionette your own sounds.
Yeah, that's right.
Marionette is a verb now.
I think if you buy the tether controller, you also get the speaker driver, and then the last piece of the puzzle is the album, the record, which the great part is that the record is not on this LP. This is just it's a medium for sort of for having amazing album artwork that was designed by Frank Olinsky.
It is very beautiful.
And actually, I don't know if you can see here, there's this rhythm that Josh has taped onto every record, which one of Dan Truman's big passions is playing Hardanger fiddle, and he bases a lot of his sort of rhythmic language on this spring-R rhythm that's common in Hardanger fiddle playing. So it's this sort of, it's a pattern where the beats are not equal lengths. So this tape is laid out in roughly a spring-R rhythm. So if you put this record on, and this happens to be a Sesame Street record, if you put this record on, you would hear Sesame Street happening with a spring-R rhythm over it.
Huh. And then, so I would assume that it jumps tracks when it gets to those tape parts too.
Yeah, it does. And you know, I'll say to the just to speak to the LP for a second. You know, there's this, and please, I got to preface this by saying we're not comparing ourselves to the Beatles at all. But there's this album.
Oh, why not?
There's this album the Beatles put out called Yesterday and Today. And the original, I think it's commonly known as the Butcher cover. When they came out with the album artwork, or the picture that they used was the 4 Beatles sitting in like chairs with lab coats on, with cuts of beef and baby doll parts strewn about. And it's kind of creepy. So if you've got a second there, Sam, or somebody, just to Google Butcher cover Beatles, you'll see this picture, and it's really crazy. And so Capitol Records printed, 75,000 of these records, sent them out to DJs and record stores or whatever. And people freaked out and said this is completely inappropriate and disgusting. And Capitol Records made the Beatles reshoot the album, do the album cover reshoot. And the current cover that you see now is one of them sitting on like a trunk wearing like suits and ties, sort of as you would normally expect the Beatles to look.
Oh my goodness, this is crazy.
Well, and so what they did is instead, see that it's awesome. I mean, the Beatles were a bunch of weirdos in the best possible way, and so this is like, so what Capitol Records did was, instead of throwing away 75,000 LPs, which is an incredible amount of plastic and an incredible amount of cardboard and whatnot, they put the new picture, which I don't know if you can throw that up there, Sam, to show what that looks like. They put the new picture on a 12 by 12 sticker and put it over top of the original album, the original 75,000 records. So now if you I think if you find one of these records with the sticker on it, or you find one of the original 75,000 without the sticker on it, it's worth like 30 grand or something ridiculous if you can find these records. But I think it got me thinking of like, well, the thing about an LP is that it's a beautiful 12 by 12 canvas for art. I mean, if you just look at it like that, I mean, that's one of the most amazing things about art, album art during the age of LPs, when that was the only way records were put out, before the cassette tape or before the CD for sure. And it's just a great canvas to put out artwork on. And so that, but then also there's like, you go to any record store now, there's these poor records that are just sort of like banished to the 50-cent bin that just live there for infamy, or for eternity. And so we thought, well, why don't we just like take an old Sesame Street record that's probably going to sit in a record store forever, spend 50 cents on it, commission new artwork to go over top of it, and put these stickers on. We're not releasing the record on it. We're not claiming that anything in this LP is ours other than the artwork. And you get a download card with the LP that gives you access to the record. You can download. You can't listen to the record on the LP, but what you can listen to is the spring-R rhythm that Dan uses in the piece, sort of as a little niche merch thing.
Yeah, I was checking out here. The records that I grabbed to show on the screen are Johnny Mathis Christmas album, and the
I listened to that a lot when I was a kid.
So it's sort of like the Island of Misfit albums, like these are like Josh was saying, the ones that end up in the 50-cent bin, because they're not the ones that are meticulously maintained and sold for $50 now. They're the leftovers.
That's really interesting. What I think is the most interesting about that, well, maybe that's going too far, but something that I think is really interesting about it is that it's not the album that you're selling, but it's like an artwork inspired by the album, or that's like part of this constellation of creativity that includes the album.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, so I really like that idea. It's so much more interesting than, buying a Led Zeppelin t-shirt or something.
Well, the thing too about it that I discovered, and I didn't really discover it, but it was made evident to me when I was making these, putting the stickers on these LPs, is like some of these things are water damaged. Some of them are from the 50s that, have sat in somebody's garage for 40, 50 years, and they're pretty beat up. But when you put a sticker on something and you sort of tape up the corners, it sort of breathes new life into this thing that is essentially, was thrown away. And we have often talked about, it's like there's all these topics about being carbon neutral and good for the environment. And the CD is something that when you print up 3,000 of them, it's like it is not going anywhere ever. It's going to sit here for as long as, the earth is here. And we also realize that like cars are being sold now without CD drives. You have to ask for them. And the new MacBook Pros don't have a CD drive in them anymore, So the idea of what used to be a very common way to play CDs, you now have an auxiliary input in your car or whatever. So I think we're just trying to acknowledge, too, that maybe the CD isn't the way that people are going to be listening to things anymore. And so resorting back to what we felt is a good medium to present just art, and then give people the music online, which is probably where they're going to get it anyway, if it's through Spotify or it's through, their friend that gives it to them on on their iPod or whatever. Anyway, it just was a neat way for us to explore that side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the interactive parts too. I mean, we talked a few months ago to Tristan Parrish, and I've got my copy of One Bit Symphony here, and it's not nearly as interactive as the things that you are talking about, but the work is generated in real time in this little bit of electronics, and even things that aren't quite so interactive. Another thing that we've talked about before is the Slagwerk Dan Haag recording of Michael Gordon's Timber is in this beautiful like wooden case. And it's just like a neat thing. It doesn't really even do anything. It's just a neat object that I really cherish.
Well, and the thing too about like Tristan's thing is that Tristan made all those.
Right.
They have solder marks. I mean, they weren't manufactured in a factory somewhere. They were Tristan and a bunch of his friends that he could pay with beer to come over and solder
and super glue and
and all of the LP covers, like anytime any of the merch stuff, with the exception of the tether controllers, which I did not put together, like all of that stuff is stuff that we made and I put together. So like you're getting something that has a bit of human effort put into it, which to us is special. I mean, I've got a little carpal tunnel now that I can attribute to this album release, and it's a nice reminder every morning when I get up and can't move my arms. It's
but Josh, it's your carpal tunnel, and it's an artistic carpal tunnel.
We're releasing carpal tunnel as our next release. Everybody gets their own sort of shoulder elbow pain with everybody.
Right. You release like instructions on a repetitive task that will yield carpal tunnel in your audience.
In order to get this record, you must twist cables for a month.
Exactly.
You guys should include a can of canned vegetables, because you do the carpal tunnel exercise. You hold the can and rotate your wrist. There you go.
And then you can play with your speaker driver afterwards.
Right. There you go. It all comes full circle.
Yeah, there you go.
I like it.
This is an amazing way to push your content out to your audience. And it strikes me that like this is so inventive and such a really audience engaging way to do this. And it doesn't seem like there no academic environment, collegiate academic environment I've been exposed to even comes close to encouraging music students to think about this kind of stuff even a little bit. Now, I understand you guys are now, is this correct? You guys are you guys collectively serve at Bard College?
Yeah.
So, and it says that stressing a strict, or not strict, but a good conservatory training with a rich liberal arts education.
Yep.
I think that's very interesting, and I'm the guy on the show who always tries to pivot back to education. I wonder if you have any thoughts on, or can just talk a little bit about what you do with students there, and is this kind of thinking about, you're not just a person who's going to learn how to play the hell out of your instrument, and that's all you got to do moving forward. Can you talk a little bit about the education-wise and what you do with the students there?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think we can't necessarily take credit for the mission up at Bard there. That's really the brainchild of Bob Martin, who started the conservatory there. And his idea was that, look, the music world is a different place now than it was 20 years ago. And for people who are in college right now, it's going to be way different by the time they're out in the world and working. So you need people who are going to think broadly and adapt to that new world. And his solution for that was, let's require everybody has to play their instrument at an incredibly high level, but then also study something else that they're interested in. And hopefully along the way, people find some connections that cross over. Oh, my math degree made me think about the way that I make music in this way, or my English degree, or, whatever that double major is. And I think when Bob was looking for a way to start a percussion department, I think maybe the reason he saw us as a good fit was because, like you're saying, things like our approach to our merchandise, or our approach to organizing our nonprofit structure, or the way we program our concerts, we're always sort of trying to take the normal perspective and just twist it a little bit to, well, what if you did it like this? What if we tried this? And it's felt like there's a good give and take there.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are kind of so Percussion, and then all the other new music ensembles that you're hearing more and more about those, I think, sort of in place of hearing about orchestras all the time. So to me, it's a good fit that you guys are like a prime example of this new generation of sort of self-motivated, self-actualizing new music ensembles. That what would be great to me is if kids graduating from music programs would, instead of thinking, I'm going to go and audition and I'm going to be in a symphony, to think, I'm going to develop this diverse set of skills and I'm going to start a new music ensemble.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think, just to speak to the Bard thing for a second, like the president of the university, Leon Botstein, is also the conductor of the orchestra there. And he had a really great interview on the Colbert Report where he talked about just like the students being students of the world, and realizing that the world is a diverse place, and as soon as you graduate, even if you have a music degree, you're going to be working with people who are philosophers and who are scientists, and you have to be able to talk to them in a way that like a human being. And Dan Truman's hello, Parsley. Dan Truman is Parsley is Eric's dog, and she just showed up. Dan Truman is a brilliant. His dad worked at one of the laboratories that does these particle collisions, and studies the Big Bang theory and string theory. And Dan is a student of the world. He's a Hardanger fiddle player, yet he can write code in Max MSP like it's nobody's business. And so for us to have to be in the same room with him, it really forces you into the sort of broadening your worldview a little bit. And I think we also, the four of us in particular, and this makes me sound and maybe feel a little old, we're of the generation that straddles the pre-internet and then the internet world. When I was going through grad school, we didn't have YouTube to look to for every answer. You have a question about something now, you can go to Wikipedia, and everybody sources Wikipedia as something, but without realizing that it's something that people can edit and change. And then you go to YouTube, and there's a million different versions of every piece that you're playing. When I was a student, and when Eric was a student in grad school, that just wasn't an option. So you were oftentimes sitting in a room staring at each other, trying to come up with a solution yourself. And, we've come up against this with students sometimes, where we'll go to coach an ensemble that's playing third construction, or is playing a piece that we've commissioned or even have written. And they'll look at us, and they've set it up the exact same way we set it up. And when we ask them why, they say, "Oh, well, we saw it on your YouTube channel. We saw it on this podcast." And our first answer to them is usually like, "Well, tear it all down because you're going to start over and find a new way, because that's the way that we set it up, or the tin cans that we use just happen to be the ones that are in our studio." You have to search for your own answers, as long as you are speaking to what the most important information is that you're seeing on the page. And so I think with this merch stuff, with the way that we deal with students and teach up at Bard, like, I think we try to really encourage students to be resourceful and come up with, why release a CD? Everybody's releasing a CD. What's the thing that's going to separate you from every other CD release that came out on the same day that Dan Truman's album did? So for us, we're always trying to answer that question.
Well, I think it's in some ways it's a shift in priorities. I mean, the conservatory model is sort of teaching people how to do it right, how to play music right, and how to play at a really high level. And that's really important for sure, too. But like Josh is saying, these days, everybody can see somebody play it right on YouTube in 30 seconds. And the way we consume music is changing with that. If we're surrounded by this incredible high level of playing and music around us all the time, we sort of look for different things from artists and musicians. And I think our approach to that has been, how can we come up with unique solutions to the issues we have? And maybe somebody will be interested in the way we came up with to solve a problem, rather than necessarily the quality of our playing or something like that.
Yeah, that's something we've talked about on the show before, and it seems to be a relatively across the board change in the way we evaluate people that we might want to work with. Chamber ensembles are looking for people that have those interdisciplinary skills that you mentioned. And even orchestras are looking for, crusty old orchestras are looking for people that can present programs in outreach concerts and stuff, that are relatable people and can speak in front of a room full of 100 7-year-olds. Like, that's not the same as being a badass violinist. And in fact, they may even be antithetical to one another, but it's something that we need to think about more and more, and that some organizations really are thinking about more and more. And to your point about YouTube, I think that's a really interesting change in the way interpretation of new music spreads. I don't think that's something we've really talked about before. I remember if there was a work that I could get a score of when I was in school, if it was relatively recent, there was no way that I would have any inkling of what it sounded like, especially if it was a really unusually notated score, unless it had been recorded and released as an album by a record label. And today you can hear so many of these different recordings, live recordings, and even see, which is, I would imagine, particularly significant for a percussionist, see these performances without any, studio time involved, yeah. which is a major shift. And especially for something like, Josh, you were talking about the Cage project with all the differences from night to night. That can be a really useful learning tool, but I suppose, as you were pointing out, it could also be a trap.
Yeah, I mean, I go back and forth about YouTube all the time because I have fallen down the YouTube rabbit hole.
Related video.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's recently it's been the cup stacking championships that I've been obsessed with. Oh, dear. If you have 3 hours you don't know what to do with, just YouTube cup stacking. It's quite remarkable. But, you put out, we put out we work with a stick company called Vic Firth, and they do a lot of podcasts of works that we do. And it's great because, they come to your studio, they record you. It's good sound quality, it's good video quality, and you put it out, and 1 million students see it. Who you're basically giving a concert to a bunch of students that you never would see otherwise, or that you wouldn't get exposure to otherwise. And so what happens with that is that the pieces that we play on those podcasts, like there were these Elliot Cole, he's a composer down at Princeton right now. He's a doctoral student there. There were some videos of us playing these vibraphone postludes that he wrote for us for Bode vibraphone. And video gets out, students start to pick them up. They email Elliot. Now there's like 30 some odd performances of these pieces that happened last year. Whereas 10 years ago, the only way those students would know about that stuff is if we were in the room playing it in front of them.
Right.
And, it's tricky because you also are up against, every cat that's playing the piano has 4 million views.
With goats screaming in it.
What's that?
With screaming goats too.
Yeah.
The screaming, which also quite entertaining.
Right. There's another 3 hours.
Yeah. There's one where what is it? It's the Pierre Linaire.
Oh yeah.
Screaming goats. It's quite good. But I think we tend to find that using it as a tool for exposing people to stuff. The trap is that you can't stop somebody from interpreting music the way you interpret it over YouTube,
Well, actually, I think part of this is that we're still used to thinking of, music is something that's written down on a page, and your job as a performer is to try to understand what's on that page and play it as closely as possible to that. And one of the things, we used to do as students was, you listen to a recording of a really good group and you assume that they're interpreting everything on the page correctly. From Cage onward, there's a lot of composers who aren't even looking for people to reproduce the piece the same way every time. They want to see, well, what can you do differently? And so then the problem with YouTube is if somebody sees us playing a Cage piece and they try to recreate it exactly the way we did it, that's actually the only way to do it wrong. Because the whole point is to see what can you do differently from the other groups that have played. And that's just that's just part of the musical culture we're in right now, and that adjustment of the way we're teaching people to think about stuff to the way that stuff is actually kind of happening these days.
And we have a bunch. You mentioned the Steve Mackey recording earlier, and I would say Dan Truman's piece definitely falls in this category. And So-Called Laws of Nature, which is a piece by Dan Truman, David Lang, used to fall in this category, but is not anymore, of pieces that we played and no one would be able to play for a long time. Like, it's either so hard that it just takes somebody months and months and months and months and months of practice to learn.
Or it calls for quarter tone steel pan.
Exactly, yes. In which Steve, and I think Steve would tell you he probably doesn't care about that, but from our standpoint, no one's going to play that piece until they get a microtonal steel drum. Like, that's just the way it's going to be for a while, and it'll happen. Dan Truman's piece is so technologically complex that, I think the four of us, just as of like a month ago, finally figured out how to do it live without any major catastrophes. Like, we recorded it, but that's a controlled situation. But live, like, there was this, we were having trouble like balancing the tether controllers on stage at one point in the show. So we were like frantically turning down our monitors and doing all this crazy stuff. And we've been playing the piece for like 3 or 4 years now. And Dan was like, but there's a fader on your program if you could just turn it down there. And there's like this one lone fader in the corner that none of us saw. And we were like, oh my God, it finally clicks. Like, this isn't crazy and scary anymore. And so, but we had to go through that learning curve. And I think there's going to be a second until Dan makes the program accessible enough for other folks to where people are going to pick that up and play it a lot. And hopefully it happens. But I think even YouTube, giving the exposure to folks, doesn't necessarily mean now with some of our works that it's going to get played a ton, because there are some hurdles that students and performers are just going to have to jump through. There's a bit of a learning curve sometimes, and it's hard to express that over YouTube until they get the score and are like, oh.
Yeah. And that's actually, something you mentioned something there that I think is really interesting about not just Percussion, but a lot of groups that are kind of in that, especially in the New York scene, but around the world. The level of agency that you guys have over the music that you're playing, and the real collaboration that's going on. It's an overused word, but I don't have a better one. Where you guys are having a really direct impact on the composition itself. in a way that I don't think is the case with all ensembles.
I would definitely say that collaboration is kind of still an underused word, to be honest.
Really?
Like,
Okay.
I agree.
I think,
I take it
or at
back.
least
I take it all back.
No, or at least an underappreciated word.
Okay,
Like,
I think maybe it becomes a like one of those buzzwords that people throw around because it sounds like a good thing, but maybe it's not happening, is what you're saying.
I think, we do a lot of talks with composers and students in the same room. Like, we'll go and we'll give a master class or a clinic to the composition department at such and such university, and the questions are always about how do we commission, or how does So Percussion go about doing a commission, or how do we get to work with So Percussion? And the answer is really complex, because we at least are of the mindset there's very few works that we do that are just straight up like, we blind call you and say, we would like to pay you this chunk of money. What is your fee? There's a negotiation, and then the score shows up 6 months later. We've never been of that mindset. We would rather be in the room with somebody that we've known for a long time, or that we've been friends with, or that we've crossed paths with a bunch, and really like their music and the way they deal with stuff, or they're just a straight up nice person to hang out with. And Steve Mackey's a good example. We sat we had a barbecue dinner with Steve and talked about sort of like, he was like, what do you do when no one's around? And I was like, well, I play steel drums, and I have this, like, I'm messing around with this, detuning of steel drums or whatever. And Eric is like, I like to play musical saw and I have these weird toys that I like to mess around with. And Jason plays drum set really well, and Adam loves the marimba. And that sort of, and then so what you get is this, we call it the Mackey Band. And
so, I was going to say, it sounds like a weird indie band.
It is, but it would not have come about if Steve wasn't curious about us and we weren't curious about being involved in the process. And Dan, in particular, he came to the table with a whole variety of stuff. The movement 120 BPM, he pretty much had scored out, had the ideas for ahead of time, and gave us the score. We practiced it really hard and learned it. The fiddle tunes that you hear, the beginning, the middle, and the very last fiddle tune you hear were sort of lead sheets like you would get in a real book or something. Like, they were just melodies with some harmonies. And we came up with arrangements on the spot for those, for the recording. Sometimes live, they're just slightly different depending on, what drum set Jason has or whatever. But then the feedback movement with the bass drum and the speaker drivers, Dan had the chordal progression and the idea about the bass drum and this like sequence of numbers and delays that he had a number pattern running through. And then past that, he was like, what do you guys think? And so Jason sat down on the drum set and was like, well, if I did this pattern around it, what do you think about that? And there were some days that were like, oh yeah, that sounds cool. That doesn't sound so cool. Let's keep that. Let's not keep that. Some days we looked at each other and we were like, we should just go eat ice cream because we got nothing. This is horrible. Like, what's going on? And Dan was freaking out. We're freaking out. But then you hit that day where it's like, holy smokes, that is amazing. Let's keep that thing that Eric did. Let's keep that. And let's have Adam do that same thing. And it really was a collaboration from start to finish. And, we like to play pieces that we're invested in.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure that there's I don't know anybody who sort of is just like, oh, I love to play stuff that I have absolutely no personal emotional investment in. Like, I don't know anybody who's like, maybe there is some people like that and I just don't hang out with them. But
yeah,
I think that's really important.
I want to talk about this piece a little bit because I feel like we kind of just talked about the album and not the piece itself earlier. But looking through the score, it strikes me that the composer, Dan Truman, has a lot of trust in you all. There are a lot of things that even in the score are left very much up to you. This opening movement, it seems, and maybe I'm not reading this correctly, this thing that is written in the opening movement is just what's on the tape, right? Basically?
It's just the fiddle recording. Right.
So, and you guys are like improvising around that?
Yeah. Basically,
okay.
like Josh was saying, we sort of sat down and we treated it like a transcription or something. So here's this thing, and we have these instruments at our disposal. So how can we make this fiddle melody sound cool with this group of instruments?
Yeah. So it's a very cool. what's the name of that instrument? The Norwegian Hardanger fiddle. So it's got those really, it's kind of almost flat sounding like a viola, and it has the kind of sympathetic strings in it.
Resonant strings.
Yeah. It's a very, very beautiful instrument. I knew a guy in school that he was a violinist, and he was from Norway, and he had a Hardanger fiddle that he would bring out every once in a while and play.
That's
and
awesome.
It's just a really cool thing. And if you've seen one, I've seen a few of them, not just his, but others. They're always very ornately decorated. They're like really beautiful objects in addition to being really cool instruments.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that it sounds in some places very folkish, and in other places sounds almost popish, and it kind of turns a corner at some point. Is that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the Hardanger tradition is so strong, and especially the sort of very unique rhythmic profile that the music has. It's unmistakable that that's what it is. Once you know when you know what a Hardanger, what a Spring R style sounds like, you would hear this music and immediately identify that. But the thing I was thinking about actually is that the instrumentation makes such a huge difference. I mean, and that's what, for us, we always come back to the physical nature of making sound on these different instruments. And as soon as you transfer a fiddle tune to a vibraphone, just that first step is completely, changing the experience for your ear. And then you add a drum set and steel pans and crotales. Or on the album, we got to have a lot of fun putting layers of desk bells and a SD organ, this sort of bellows organ that we use on a lot of stuff. And that's where I was thinking about this whole collaboration question. For us, we start every project. The first step of the collaboration is always, what are the instruments that are going to be in the room? What is the composer writing for? And that first question already brings up so many of its own solutions with it. And I think that was, with Dan, the first step in him writing this piece actually was that we loaned him our concert bass drum. I remember we took it over and we put it in his basement, and he was like, I just want to mess around with a big concert bass drum and see what's possible with it. And we never would have thought that he would come up with this whole feedback loop thing. I don't think he thought he was going to come up with a feedback loop, but he was just, every day he would go down and he would do something new with the bass drum and come up with some way of playing it.
We should say feedback loop sounds scary, but it's actually very beautiful as it's used in this piece.
Yeah, well, it's a very controlled kind of feedback. Right. But so, just to me, it's kind of amazing that physical object has so much to do with all of the mental work you do through the process of writing the piece and coming up with the way to play it. It's not like you start, your Mozart walking down the street and you have this idea of the violin melody and here's how the cellos are going to respond or something. You start off with, I have an enormous drum in my basement. What are the different ways that you can make sound on an enormous drum? Go.
Yeah.
And I mean, the fiddle tunes are also a good example of that. I think we kind of said, Josh should play steel pans on this, Adam should play vibraphone, and then let's see what those characteristics lend themselves to making the transcription happen.
I think it strikes me as a particularly percussion way of thinking about creativity, because there is such a variety of sound sources that are available to percussionists. When you write a piece for a clarinetist, you got the clarinet. You got a few flavors of clarinet, but you got the clarinet. And it strikes me as a fundamentally different thing than saying you got a percussionist. They can make just about any sound in the universe. And of course you can ask your clarinetist to, play any of these instruments. A good friend of ours is a percussionist who's been on the show a few times, Ty Forker, always jokes that there are so many things that he is asked to do as a percussionist that he has there's no reason why the percussionist should be playing the duck call instead of anyone else in the orchestra. It just happens to be the way it's written on the page. Like, he has no particular why doesn't an oboist play the duck call? Surely they are more expert in playing a wind instrument than the percussionist.
Well, given the length of my beard, I think I often get mistaken for a member of Duck Dynasty. So I think that's why they would have me play the duck call. They assume that I hunt ducks.
Hey. Say hey.
Hey, Jack.
Well,
Hi.
well, but the thing I was thinking, Josh mentioned the Mackie band thing. I mean, that's the thing. Now, every chamber ensemble is its own band, right? And even every rock band these days, it's not just two guitars and a bass player and a drummer or something. Everybody now has like their own unique group of musicians. The weird thing about us as a percussion ensemble is that we're the same four guys, but we change our band every piece. So, yeah, it's just like what we deal with as a group. That's our first step in the process.
Well, and I think makes percussionists think about the music that they're making differently than string players, for example, because you are, hunting down the actual instruments. I can think of a time when Ty, this guy I just mentioned, was like going to different like yard work supply places looking for the right stones that would make the right noises when he banged the stones together. And that strikes me as a level of control over the music that string players don't have. When you're asked to play the violin, you play the violin, but when you're asked to play a rock, you have to find a rock. And there are a lot of them.
Well, and I'll say too, I always sort of felt bad for like my violinist friends in grad school or in undergrad or people who played piano, and I envied them, but also felt bad in some respect. Like a piano player has such a beautiful instrument. They never have to carry it with them anywhere. Yes, there are some keys that have different action and, some pianos that feel differently than others, but by and large, it's a pretty standardized thing. So they're never really dealing with any of that sort of baggage that we have, like having to go find a rock. But in the same token, anytime someone's playing a Beethoven piano sonata or a Bartók string quartet or something, like there's hundreds of years of history that come with that. And there's a level of virtuosity that is just expected. And if you don't play at that level, then you immediately, like, no one cares about your artistic vision on that stuff. It's just, well, you can't play in tune, so it doesn't matter. And for us, there's a level of stuff that we can just get away with in most of our instruments. Like, whenever you play a marimba at a hall, like, you're not responsible for the tuning of that marimba. If one of the notes is flat, one of the notes is flat. That's not my fault, and I can't fix it. There is, however, enough baggage with the marimba, it's been around long enough that you can be compared to other things. But we also have the luxury of, when you play cactus on stage, there's no such thing as a cactus virtuoso. It's something that anybody in the room can do. And it frees you up a little bit to just focus on what your artistic, like what the sound is, what it is that you're trying to get across. And I would say for us, that's one of the luxuries, because you're sitting in a room with Steve Mackey or Dan Truman, and they're looking around saying, like, what can we put on this? And you say, well, I've got this tin can and I've got this E-flat hoe blade or whatever that we found, and it makes our life really exciting in many respects, and frees us up to do basically whatever we want to do, which is nice.
Well, I have to say, I've always sort of been jealous of people who get to play just one instrument all the time and get really, really good at that thing. It's like a grass is always greener on the other side.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Obviously, we're the type of people who we really enjoy that process of discovery with new instruments. But like Josh is saying, you don't become a cactus virtuoso. You get good enough at it to do the things that you're doing for this piece. And I think within percussion also, we always try to be really respectful of, there are certain percussion instruments that have incredibly virtuosic traditions. Josh is actually a virtuoso steel pan player. So it's not like he just got a pair of steel drums and said, I'm going to bang on these until something comes out. He practiced for years and years and years and got really good at it. And they're amazing, tabla players and, gamelan performers and, congueros and all this kind of stuff where people spend their whole lives mastering one thing. We're just sort of we're the garbage collectors of the percussion world. We go around and we find a little bit of everything to mess around with.
Well, and I would say, too, the thing that the four of us, that I love about being in a percussion quartet, especially, and I would probably say the same about, we play a lot with the Culver String Quartet from California, and they the thing that the four of us can say that we're virtuosic at, and I don't mean this isn't a bragging thing, but like I would say that our virtuosity comes from being able to play with each other. There is a level of virtuosity that comes from watching a really good basketball team communicate with each other, or a really good string quartet, or a really good orchestra. You watch the LA Phil play, and it's like, wow, that is a team that has played together for a while. They've got a really good conductor, and the concertmaster is amazing, and it's fun to watch them play. There's this really great orchestra from Bremen, Germany, that Adam turned me on to, that is conducted by Pavel Jarvi, and they do these amazing like Beethoven performances, like a small chamber version of like Beethoven 7, and it's crazy. But like in that same token, like I know exactly what Adam's going to sound like before he makes a sound, and same with Eric and Jason, and they know what I'm going to sound like. And if I need help with something during a show, I can look at Eric, and he knows what that look in my eye means when I'm about to like screw the pooch. So no matter whether we're playing a rock or whether we're playing a Cactus or steel drum or a piece by Dan Truman or Steve Reich, like our roots go back to just playing with each other a lot. And so I would say that's where that's the virtuosity, or the level. Virtuosity is maybe the wrong word, but
I think it's a great word for it.
The level of familiarity that we have with each other, because we don't have a level of familiarity with a tradition of our instrument yet, because there isn't one. I mean, it's less than 100 years old as far as classical percussion is concerned. Percussion's been around since the dawn of time, but the marimba hasn't, and the steel drum's been around since World War II. So like there's only so much familiarity I'm going to have with that instrument that students 200 years from now are just going to look back and, I don't envy the students 200 years from now. I think that's going to stink for them, because they're going to be like, oh, you're playing Dan Truman's piece. Well, did you do it like so Percussion did in, 2013?
Right.
You guys are not bogged down with the unbelievable weight of a canon. Like a string quartet, there are certain obligations they're expected to fill, even if they do lots of new music, but they've still got this canon they're dragging behind them. And I think not having that can be a very liberating thing.
Well, and I think the ensemble virtuosity that you mentioned is really what defines the greatness of a chamber ensemble in general. There are a lot of great string players in the world that all play in string quartets, but not all of them play in great string quartets. And the thing that makes a great string quartet great is the way they play together, and I think that's the measure of a chamber ensemble is their virtuosity as a group, and their the communication that you mentioned, and the way they work with each other in and out of the performance is what makes them great, as much as, if not more than, their individual technical proficiency on their instruments.
You mentioned Chronos right up front of the interview, and for us, watching a group dynamic like Chronos, who's existed for 30 some odd years, like we are heavily influenced by their group dynamic as players, the way they perform together, but also their group dynamic as like their artistic curation of what music they want to put out. There's a virtuosity in that too, that there's a virtuosity in the branding of your vision that I think Chronos sort of put their stamp on early on. But we're also fascinated by watching, groups like Cincinnati Percussion Group, or for us, a big influence has been Nexus out of Canada. They're a percussion quartet now, and just watching different groups who have played together for so long communicate. We constantly are learning by watching them do stuff, and are like, that. We saw this one of the most amazing performances I have seen in a long time was watching Nexus at LPR here in New York last June, a year ago, do these George Hamilton Green xylophone rags, and it's like, in the wrong hands, that music can really be cheeseball and not successful, but they treat it with such a level of intensity and seriousness and just raw virtuosity, like just total, I don't even know, just amazing. And they brought the house down. And these are guys who've been playing together for 40 years. They're in their 60s, and they are just shredding. And, it was a little bit like, all right, I am not there yet. That is a level that I have not reached yet, and I'm so excited to get there someday. But it's really inspiring to see groups who have played together for a long time just do their work, you know.
You know, you mentioned curation, and I think that's a great word for what a lot of new music performers end up having to do. A lot of is curate the vast ocean of all of the music that's being created today, and figure out what they want their identity to be in the world of new music. People ask me, and I would imagine they ask Sam and probably you guys all the time, that don't listen to a lot of recent classical music, for lack of a better term, and they ask, you know, how do I get started? And one thing that I often tell people how to get into new music is to find not a composer that you really dig, but a performer that you really dig, and whose repertoire really matches your aesthetic, because I think they lead you to composers, and then you kind of branch out from those composers and find other ensembles that are playing that music, or other, you know, soloists that are playing that music, and then kind of branch out through performers as opposed to branching out through composers, because of that curation role that performers have with regards to recent music, for which a canon is yet to be established.
Well, that's what I was just thinking about when Josh was talking about Chronos curating the music they play. It's sort of like they were Pandora, or something.
Absolutely.
You know? Like, oh, if you like Black Angels, you might like Different Trains, and it's totally true. That's definitely the way we see ourselves. You know, like Dan is a great example. Dan Truman is really well known in the electronic music world for starting the Princeton Laptop Orchestra, and so much of the interesting audio interfaces that are happening in the music world today are because of people like him. But then there are tons of people who still don't know about him as a composer, and we just think that's ridiculous. People should know about this guy. He's amazing. And so if you like Steve Mackey, maybe you'll like Dan Truman, or if you like something else that we've done, cool, come in and check that out. And hey, check out this other thing while you're here too.
Well, at the risk of letting this podcast run to 7 or 8 hours,
I had one more thing, Dave.
Oh, go for it, Sam.
I was going to say, Dave cut me off. I was going to say, we need to wrap up soon, but I have a question, and I could probably have answered this if I'd scoured your discography, but I have a question, and if the answer is no, then I have a suggestion. Have you guys done any sort of a, I don't know what to call it, maybe like a remix project? I'm thinking of like Gabriel Prokofiev did a piece called Jerk Driver for solo cello, and then pieces of that were released for remix. So the album was the original piece, Jerk Driver, performed by the cellist, and then the rest of the pieces on the album were remixes of same. Have you done anything like that, or do you plan on it?
The answer is we would love to do something like that, for one. Two, we already have done something like that, but possibly in the most self-indulgent way. There's an album called Amid the Noise that is all music that Jason Truding wrote, who's a member of So. And we did, the four of us did remixes of that album for each other. Like I took some of Jason's tunes and sort of put some beats behind them and did some other things and remixed them, and we put them out as an Amid the Noise remix album. But we just remixed our own music, which is
that's awesome.
Admittedly self-indulgent. But it is out there somewhere if you would like to look for it. But it would be awesome for us to put them out for other folks to remix and mess around with, for sure.
Well,
a little nepotism never hurt anybody.
Well, maybe that's not true, but at least it didn't hurt us. I mean,
it's definitely not true.
No members of So were harmed in the making of that remix.
Well, this year, actually, in November, we're going to be at Carnegie Hall again, and we're going to be doing David Lang's piece, So-Called Laws of Nature, which we've played a million times, and Bryce Desner is writing a new piece for us. And we're going to be working with Matt Most on making remixes of the pieces on the concert to happen live on the concert with us for that. So that actually it's going to be a sort of live version of the album concept that you're talking about.
Nice. This question was also a way to try and get you to talk about Matt Most, because I'm a big Matt Most fan.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's great.
Have you worked with him already, or is this like in the future still?
This is, yeah, it's going to be happening as the pieces come together for the concert. What we want is for them to sort of take the different threads of the pieces that are happening on the concert and make a remixed version of that can be performed live.
We have done an album. We did an album with Matmos called Treasure State. That is part of our discography, if you will. We've known Matmos. I mean, ever since I joined in 2006, we've been doing stuff with them off and on. And I play in a duo from time to time with Martin from Matmos, and yeah, we love those guys.
All right.
And speaking of self-indulgence, my last question is: you guys have done a collaboration with Medeski, Martin, and Wood, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm a huge Medeski, Martin, and Wood fan.
Yes.
So are we.
Yeah, so are we. And we met John Medeski through this project that we did with Bobby Previtt called Terminals. And I think there's some stuff on YouTube somewhere, just to give a YouTube shout out, if you will. And we've known and been around in circles with the drummer Billy Martin and been fans of him for a long time. And they did a thing at the Masonic Temple in Brooklyn where they were like bringing other artists and drummers to come in and play with them and switch in and out. And we sat in with Billy and played in there, played a set with them. And it was awesome and terrifying. I'll speak for myself. Like that is talk about a chamber group that has a level of virtuosity unseen and heard by anyone else. Like, that is like being on a bullet train that just jerks and moves at the drop of a hat, and it was super fun.
And like the best concert I ever saw, like it was a nonstop 2 hours of music that was like a remix of all their own content. You'd go, oh, wait a minute, I know that song, but it was like they would finish a song and improvise their way to a new song, and on and on and on. That's
a group that can say anything they want to say whenever they want to say it, and it's kind of impressive. You don't see many groups like that. It's really, really impressive.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So we've had this double dutch of me and Sam each trying to get our thing in. And I think we're good now.
Thanks for having us.
No, it was great to have you. We want to just to wrap up the show. I want to play a little clip of a video performance that you guys have posted of this Dan Truman piece, Neither Anvil Nor Pulley. It's on Vimeo. The whole thing is there, and it's a great video. And I love that you guys are just putting it up there for anybody to grab. And it's a great thing because you're offering these premium bespoke merch things, and I think it's two separate levels of interest and two separate markets. So this is a couple of I've clipped out a little part of the beginning. Or kind of the transition from Hand Dog Springer into 120 BPM, and then a little bit later in 120 BPM when you see the if you are having trouble imagining what those golf controllers look like in performance, there's a little clip that includes them as well. So this is our guests, Josh and Eric, plus the rest of So Percussion, so times 2-ish, performing Dan Truman's Neither Anvil Nor Pulley. So that was an excerpt from Dan Truman's Neither Anvil Nor Pulley, a.k.a. Spirit of the Machine, performed by our guests, So Percussion. We don't have all of So Percussion here, but we have the ones that were willing to join us on Skype this morning. Or available.
You have the most important ones.
That's right.
The smartest and the best looking members.
Eric and Josh, thank you for sharing that with us, and please convey our thanks to Adam and Jason as well. It was a really just a really sharp video of a great performance of a really interesting piece. So we would encourage everyone to check that out. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
So it was great having you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, you're welcome back anytime, or maybe please come back sometime so we can talk about all those things that we didn't get to this time. It was great having you.
We'd be happy to. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
That's going to do it for this week's SoundNotion. Thanks to everyone who joined us live. If you'd like to watch the show live, we do it every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and you can watch the live stream at soundnotion.tv/live. And you can join us in chat there if you have any questions. We try to pay attention to that, and when we have guests, we'll try to pass those questions along. We'd like you to be a part of the conversation. So if you have any comments, if you're watching this after the fact and you'd like to comment on the show, or if you'd like to read about any of the stuff that we've talked about, any of So's projects. We didn't talk about any news this week because we got so engrossed talking to Eric and Josh. But we'll have links to all of the cool projects that we talked about today on our site, soundnotion.tv/SN. You can also connect with us on Facebook or Twitter. We're at SoundNotion as a group on Twitter. You can also, if you're interested in suggesting a story or something for us to talk about on the show, you can tweet us with hashtag SNWeekly, and we watch that hashtag throughout the week as we're putting the show together. You can also tweet us individually. I'm at Dave McDowell. Sam is at HouseGoy. So Percussion is at So Percussion. Do you guys have individual Twitter things that you'd like to share?
Yeah, So Percussion's the best way.
Yeah. So catch them at So Percussion on the Twitter machine. Like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, all that good stuff. You can subscribe to us in the iTunes store and get every episode downloaded to your device. We have audio and video versions for people that prefer one or the other. SoundNotion's introduction includes music by Patrick Gullo and video by Tyler Lepp. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you back next week.